Well, welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us again today. Today we're going to do some canning. We're going to pressure can green beans, the only safe way to do it. Now here are some green beans that I picked this week from my garden. I've got two kinds in here. I've got Top Crop and Roma, and I don't have a whole lot. If I had more, I might separate them by variety, but it really doesn't matter. You want to get everything together. Here's some vinegar, and this is a little spatula I use as a debubbler, my big scoop, my lifters, and a magnetic wand. It's good to get everything together before you start. I have my jars already washed, and they're in my roaster here with hot water. Now you can use your canner to store them in hot water, but whoever designed my kitchen never cooked or canned, and so I would have to drag them back and forth across the kitchen. I'm dropping my lids in here. These are just regular ball lids. You don't have to boil them. You should not boil them. You don't even have to heat them. But I have the hot water here, so I'm just going to drop them in. And here are my rings. Now, I have more jars than I probably need just to be safe. And this is my funnel that measures my headspace. And I'm going to need hot water for my jar, so I've got that on the stove too. And I have my canner ready. This is an All-American 915. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. These lids have been washed. They were washed in the dishwasher, and then they were totally dried by hand. But I want you to look at this. I've got a little vinegar on a paper towel, and even though these were absolutely clean to the eye and rust-free, look what I got. Somehow or other the water gets under that little lip and can cause little minute traces of rust. And if you have trouble with your jar sealing, you might want to try this. It takes a couple minutes, and just every time I get ready to can, I run a little vinegar around and dig down in there, and I always find little tiny bits of rust. You also want to check each ring to make sure that they're not bent or marred in any way. So let's get started. You want to arrange everything so that it's handy, because you're going to work pretty quickly. You must do just one jar at a time. You don't get to fill them all up and then put water in all of them and then cap them all. You do one at a time. And the reason is you have hot water, a hot jar, and we're doing raw pack, so the beans are cold, but they won't cool it down too much. You do the one jar at a time so that everything is about the same temperature when you put it in the canner. I have the heat on my canner, but I don't have it boiling. I have it on about, I guess, 4 out of 9, enough so that it's hot, but it's not boiling. Now we're doing raw pack, and raw pack directions say pack tightly. If you want to do these hot pack, it's different. You boil them for 10 minutes before you start, and then you put the beans and the water loosely in the jar. But this is raw pack, and I do this because it's so much quicker. So you just push them down hard, and I mean really pack them in. When you're doing raw pack vegetables, you generally, they hold more air, and so that air will come out as they're canning. So you want this to be as tightly packed as you can. And then you're going to add your hot water. This was boiling when I took it off the stove. It's not boiling now. Doesn't have to be. And I'm going to tell you, it does make a difference if you add your water slowly. It makes fewer bubbles for you to release. And we're going to really be talking about siphoning as we work. See, we're going to fill it to 1 inch. And that inch is important. Every recipe, every direction is going to tell you the proper headspace. And you must use the proper headspace, because the time of processing is figured using that headspace. So I use this little spatula to release the air bubbles. Kind of press it back down a little bit. Now, because we're doing this raw pack, if a little bit of the bean is above the water line, it doesn't matter. make sure your water line is at 1 inch. So this is vinegar. I'm going to clean around the edges because these were clean jars, but still you want to clean around the edges because you can get little bits of oil and it might prevent a seal. Also take your finger and go around the edge, the rim, and make sure you don't have any chips. Those are things that will make your jar not seal. So here's my lid, just warm, not boiled, and the ring. And I always back around a little bit for it to get seated properly. Finger tight. Don't crank it down, just finger tight. And then we're going to move this one to the canner. And the temperature between the jar and the canner should be very close to prevent thermal shock. I'm going to do one more so you can see it, mostly because I want to talk some more. This is a 1.5 pint jar. It's not a quart. You can mix sizes like this as long as you process to the time for the larger jar. And I want some 1.5 pints, and so I will do them for the full 25 minutes that you would do a quart. And if I had about a pint left over at the end, I would do a pint. Whoops, I got a little string I missed. And we'll push it down to the 1 inch. Tight, tight, tight. Now I'll just say in passing as I'm doing this, somewhere somebody on YouTube is going to tell you it's okay to water bath these. It just simply isn't. It's very dangerous to water bath them. Green beans, in fact almost all vegetables, are low acid foods, and they must be processed at the high temperature of a pressure canner in order to ensure your safety, to make sure that the botulism spores that exist in most foods are killed, because low acid food can develop botulism. It's rare, but it's one of those things that while it's rare, it's deadly. So don't let anybody convince you that it's okay to water bath green beans. Even if they've done it for generations and nobody died, doesn't mean you won't. So I just want to stress that because it seems like that comes up pretty often. One other thing, now would be the time to add salt if you want salt. You don't have to add salt in just about everything except pickles. Salt is optional and to your taste. So I'm not salting these, and I don't usually salt my canned food because I use it in cooking and I salt the cooking. So the lid on, make sure it's seated properly before you put the ring on. Ring on, back it up a little for it to seat. Tighten it straight, finger tight. Now let's go to the canner. This is my All-American 915. I've had both Presto and Miro. They're fine canners, but I just prefer All-American. I just added the rest of the vinegar. You only need about an ounce or a glug, however you want to measure it. It's not a precise science. This will hold 7 quarts or 9 pints. I don't have that many, but I'm going to go ahead and can what I have. So we put the lid on. The All-American has these bolts that you tighten down, and I was going to show you how I did that, but I missed that shot. So you tighten opposite sides together just so that you get a level lid, and then you go back on a second turn and make sure they're good and tight. And this moves around on the stove easily, actually, because I have a gas stove, but it makes a good tight seal. Now, the All-American has both a dial gauge and a weight regulator, and I'll use both in the process just to show you how I'm doing it. A Presto and a Miro, they're different. You need to read your manual. This is the weight. It shows 5, 10, and 15 pounds. We're going to work at 11 pounds because I'm under 1,000 feet. And the 10-pound weight holds you at 11 pounds pressure. Don't ask me why. That's just how it is. So I have the heat on. We're going to go away and wait for it to start venting. So I would show you the plume of steam, but you can't see it on this camera on the white background. Anyway, you can hear it. And you want to make sure that this vents long enough for all the extra air to be pushed out of the canner so that you get a proper temperature inside. When it starts a steady plume of steam, set your timer for 10 minutes. And after that 10 minutes, we will drop the weight onto the little stem. Make sure you have it at the 10-pound mark. There you go. That's my 10-pound mark. And this is hot. Do it kind of carefully. You might want to wear an oven glove. I still have my heat on high. When you reach the proper pressure, turn your heat down just a little, maybe 1 or 2 notches. Set your timer for 25 minutes. I'll be back in 10. I'm going to let you watch this for just a minute. If you can see how it's moving back and forth. It's not jiggling, it's not dancing, it's riding on the steam. And if you have a canner that has both a pressure gauge and a weight, you can double check yourself by seeing that with that movement, this stays precisely on the 11-pound mark. Each canner, each brand of canner has a different way to gauge whether or not your canner is at the right weight or the right pressure depending on how the weight moves. I can only show you the All-American because that's the only one I have now. But once you have, if you have an All-American and you have both pressure measuring mechanisms, then it's easy for you to see that you don't have to let this thing dance. You don't have to keep your heat too high. And the trick, if there is a trick, to eliminating or minimizing siphoning is to never have major temperature changes. So I have this at 11. My heat is turned down to 4 out of 9. With this canner, with my bigger canner, because it holds heat longer, it would be 3 out of 9. You have to determine that with your canner. You have to try it a couple of times, figure it out. I recommend that you start out with an empty canner. Just water, maybe some jars of water, and test it so that you can learn with your stove and your canner where you need to keep the temperature in order to maintain 11 pounds or whatever pounds you're required for your elevation without jiggling the heat back and forth. That's called the sweet spot. The lowest possible heat setting to maintain the proper pressure. And it's worth your time to figure that out, find it, and use it. See, we get one of those every once in a while. So I'll come back in 15 minutes. Okay, my timer's gone off. Here we are. It's been 25 minutes. Turn the heat off. It's still full of pressure. You can see that. So we're going to let it sit now until that pressure pegs down to 0. And we'll be back. So it's been about 45 minutes. That will vary with canner. You see it's pegged down at the 0. But what I know from experience on at least the All-American is that that doesn't mean that every single bit of the pressure has gone. So I'm going to take an oven mitt and very gently press against that until all of the steam is released. It's just the tiniest bit of pressure, but if you just pull the weight off, then you have a sudden change, and that can cause siphoning. When you have absolutely no more hiss, you can take the weight off. Let me emphasize, never do this until your pressure gauge is pegged down at 0. You never want to do anything to hurry it up, but with the All-American canner, the weight holds the last little bit of pressure in, so that's the only way to get it all out. and we want to minimize any pressure changes. So as many times as I've done this, I always get excited now because I want to see what we've got in here. And we'll just screw these bolts off. And they're pretty hot. I always start with an oven mitt. And there's lots of steam in there, so you want to make sure when you open it that you open it away from your face, because you don't want to get that blast of steam. Like that. And there'll be a lot of water accumulated up in there too, and it'll make a mess. So here we go. Let's see what we have. They're always still bubbling at this point, so I'm going to wait about another 5 minutes before I actually take them out. I'll be back. Not too shabby. There's the water line. I'll show that to you on the other one too. These were raw packed. They're still floating. They'll settle. We're going to let this sit 12 hours before we take the rings off, and then I'll show you what we have. With hot pack, you would have less of that floating, but I just prefer the raw pack. I'll be back in the morning. 13 hours later, they all sealed, and they look pretty good. Very, very little siphoning except on one jar. And you can see there's the water line, and there's the water line. I'll wash these off in cold water and date them on the top and put them in rotation with my canned goods. Don't stack them. Leave the rings off. You don't need the rings. This is how you check them. You pick it up by the lid. If it holds, they're sealed. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. Hope to see you again tomorrow.